Hey friends, welcome to Huge Head Studio. My name is Robbie and I like to sculpt and paint. And this week I decided to make another mounted head, but this time I want to make Bob Belcher from Bob's Burgers. I've always been a fan of Bob because he's just a regular guy trying to keep things together while the world around him slowly falls apart, which I just feel in my bones. So let's grab some clay, fire up the grill, and make a mount of Bob's head for the wall. We're also going to see how many times we can say the name Bob in one video. Anyway, I like the idea of taking a simple 2D cartoon character and adding unflattering detail to him so he looks a lot more realistic, and slightly less fortunate. I think there's something fun about imagining what these clean, flat characters would look like if they had pores and wrinkles and a face full of imperfections. Kinda like those moments in Ren and Stimpy where they'd zoom in way too close and then suddenly you'd see all the pimples and stray whiskers and eye boogers. It's disgusting, but it's real, and I think real is always better than photoshopped. So that's the kind of energy I wanted for Bob. Still recognizable, still Bob, just with a little more texture and a lot more signs of exhaustion. At the moment, Bob just kind of looks like a fat corn dog, so I start sketching in lines for his eyes, nose, mouth, and of course his mustache, which helps our corn dog look more like a humanish head. For now, I'm following my sketch of 2D Bob, and I'm kind of just guessing my way to 3D Bob, so going at it with no real plan, which is how all great art is made, right? Yeah, it never leads to mistakes. But even though we're in the early stages, something still feels off, so I compare it to my sketch and realize that our corn dog needs to be just a little bit fatter. So I grab some more clay and turn our corn dog into a hot dog and then watch as it magically blends off screen. Ain't that just fantastic? Next, we add a little noodle and squish it down and smooth it out to make Bob's chin. While adding the chin, I realized that Bob's neck just has too much meat. His neck isn't very beefy in the cartoon, it's actually more of a long, skinny turtleneck, so I grab a blade and trim off some of the excess fat before smoothing it all back out. Next comes the nose, and everybody in Bob's Burgers has that same U-shaped nose, but I'm trying to make it a slightly more realistic version of that U. My big trick for adding realism is nostrils, which is groundbreaking, I know. After that, we're ready for the eyes, and the eyes in Bob's Burgers are another feature that are shared by pretty much every character. They're wide open, they're kind of piercing, like they've all seen some shit. So I pre-baked a pair of oval-shaped eyes out of semi-transparent Sculpey and squished them into what I hope is the right spot. My only purpose for using a different color for the eyes here is to help me visualize the piece as we sculpt. It'll all get painted later. But then I take them back out so I can use a little tool to scoop out the excess goop and give the eyes a recessed place to sit so they're not bulging too far out of his face. Once the eyes have a nice little place to sit, we squish them back in and hope they end up facing the same way. But close enough counts. But in the end, they're still kind of bulging, so we need to add some little noodles of clay around the eyes to make them look more like eyes. So we slowly but surely work our way around the eyes, adding tiny little noodles of clay and blending them into the face until they start looking a little more realistic and a little less cartoony. But after a few lines and wrinkles, it's clear that we're just not quite there yet. The eyelids need a little bit more volume, so we add some more noodles of clay to build them up. I don't want to change the look of the cartoon Bob's eyes too much, just enough so they look like they could actually blink. After that, we move on to his mouth, which takes a little bit of creativity since in the cartoon it's basically just a straight thin line. I have to figure out what Bob's mouth would actually look like in real life, so I'm going for something simple and average, nothing too weird or lip fillery like whatever Zac Efron has going on these days. Once the mouth is good enough, we apply some heavy coats of alcohol to smooth out the clay and soften it up for texturing. To rough up the skin a bit and suggest pores, I take an old dried out paintbrush and just start stabbing him until his skin is covered with texture and imperfections. Then we brush on another coat of alcohol to knock down the hard edges and blend everything together. After that, he's ready for the first bake, so we throw Bob into the oven until our base is good and solid. And because the base is solid, we can finally add layers without the fear of ruining what we've already done, so we can slap on his mustache and eyebrows without altering the skin underneath. Next, we flatten out some clay and stick it to his head. I squirt some lines into the head before baking to give myself an idea of where the hairline should sit, so we cut along that line to give us the right shape for Bob's hair, which, out of all the hairstyles, it sure is one of them. The hair in the cartoon is of course 2D, but I'm imagining that the curve in his hair near his eyes is actually layers brushed back over the rest of the hair that goes down his neck. So I add a bit more clay to build it up and suggest that this section is sitting on top of everything else. That side was shaping up fine, but the other side is under constant threat of my fat fingers squishing all the progress, so it's time to throw Bob back on his mount so I have something to hold on to without ruining everything. Now that he's mounted, I repeat the process on the other side to build up the layered look and then scratch in a bunch of lines to suggest long, stringy hairs. I'm going to build the hair up in stages so I don't ruin the progress as we go. So with the lower section of his hair done, I'm ready to move on to the facial hair before we bake him again. I realized his mustache was underachieving, much like my own, so I extended it a bit before trimming it down to shape. Once we got the shape looking right, I poked and scratched and clawed at it in lines running down and away from the nose, following the natural growth until I had a nice, chunky, full mustache. Perfect for catching all the burger crumbs and grease for future snacking. We also poke and prod and scratch at the eyebrows to give them the same texture, and then we're ready to bake it again. After a short time relaxing in the oven at 275 degrees, the hair is hard and ready for the top layer. So I cut out this little toupee of hair and make sure it fits before taking it back off and then slathering on some bacon bond to hold it into place. Bob's hair has these spiky bits on top poking up that look like the flat irons in Boulder, so I'm building each one up layer by layer with little bits of clay until it matches the same vibe as the cartoon. Once the spikes are in place, I expertly and very artistically just scratch the shit out of them until it all resembles somewhat believable hair. Believable is a strong word. It's not actually realistic, but there's more texture than the cartoon, so that's good enough for me, and we take the little wins as they come. Then we bake it yet again to harden everything and lock in all the details. After carving out some grooves where I want his beady little pupils to go, it's time to add his ridiculous neck. When I made the Frankenstein's monster mount, the neck was the dumbest part, and somehow that made it my favorite. But as we said before, Bob has this long, turtle-like neck that looks a lot like your grandma's, so it actually fits the mount a lot better than expected. Once we get the neck completed, that means the sculpting is all done, so we're ready to paint. I throw on a glove real quick because I just don't feel like painting my hand, and then we start airbrushing a skin tone that's very close to the beige of the Sculpey. When mixing the paint, I left it a little thick, so instead of coming out of the airbrush in a steady flow, it comes out in a bit more of a sputter. The sputter kind of helps create a textured look with a little bit more color variation between the original Sculpey and the pink of the paint. I used the same sputter technique to spray on some stubble and suggest a bit of 5 o'clock shadow. After that, we add some pink, where the face might look pink, before adding a handful of white layers to the eyes until they're one solid coat with no streaks. Next, we make it look like the pupils were added magically off camera, when in reality I was basically nose to nose with Bob, looking at it as closely as possible, trying to paint them on nice and clean. Using some red pan pastel, I add some color to the eyes to break up the stark white a bit and suggest a little bit of stress. I do more of the same with some white and red pan pastels across the face to push highlights and lowlights and create additional color variation. In hindsight, I realize I could have gone further by adding more colors to the face. Could have done green undertones in the lower face, yellows around the eyes and forehead, and blues near the mouth and chin. It may have pushed Bob to the next level, but we'll call that a lesson learned and save it for the next project, because it's fun to see how your work progresses with experience. Or at least that's my excuse for not bothering to add the colors to Bob like I probably should have in the first place. Anyway, we put Bob back on his mount so we have something to hold on to while finishing the details. We painted it a simple white just to represent Bob's white shirt. I painted his hair black like in the cartoon, then arbitrarily dry brushed some gray here and there to break up the flat color. Again, we probably could have spent some more time making each stroke intentional, but that's how the next one gets better. They say practice makes perfect, but good enough never hurt my feelings. Finally, we add what's becoming my typical final step, which is coating the eyes in a bit of UV resin to suggest moisture. Though if anybody's eye should be dry, it's Bob. The way he holds them open like he's in a clockwork orange, but it makes them shiny and I like it. And that's Bob, mounted, painted, and ready for the wall. Once I actually pick a wall. I got ahead of myself with these guys and started making them before I actually had a place to put them, but soon I'll pick a home for them where they can sit and stare and silently judge me while I work. Anywho, that's all for this one, so give it a like if you liked it. If not, well, valid. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see what we come up with next time. Maybe we'll go bigger for the next one. We'll see. Thanks for watching, stay weird, and keep making